This series, The Ugly Truth, is all about looking at the relationships that we have and the toll that life takes on our relationships that we care so much about. And life has created a lot of stresses in our marriages and in our family and with our friends and even within the church. Our culture and the world that we are living in is constantly stretching and pulling at our relationships. And so we're taking an honest look at navigating the strong feelings that allow us to maybe then create some stronger relationships. And today we're going to be taking an honest look at marriage relationships. And if you're not married, I hope you don't think that this is a checkout day. I hope that you can understand that this is actually a perfect day for you to be at, because we're going to begin to get a clear vision of God's design for our heart. Whether we're married or not, the implications of this message are going to impact our relationships. And so I hope you'll tune in. You know, as a pastor, I get to do a lot of weddings. And one of the benefits and blessings of being a pastor is seeing people start their marriages together and their lives together. And if you've ever been to a wedding ceremony, you've maybe seen some candles that look like this. And sometime during the ceremony where these two candles get lit, either during the ceremony or right before it, these candles get lit, and let's see if they'll stay lit for the message here, right? And they light these candles, and they represent the two chapters of people's lives, their family and the series of experiences that each individual brings into the marriage. And then during the ceremony, at some point, the man and the woman, they take their individual lives represented by each individual flame, and they bring them together. It's such a cool picture to light the center candle, representing that they're making a pact, a commitment, a covenant to make God the center of their marriage, and the two are becoming one. We're just going to let that burn down, and if the candles go out and burn down before I'm done with my message, we know I went too long, right? The little secret that these newlyweds don't really quite understand yet is that a new chapter of their life, while it has begun and these two lives have come together and formed one bond, what they don't fully comprehend is while the flames burn bright on their wedding day, a new chapter is about to hit them head on with pressures and conflict and communication and stress that's about to create some fractures in that relationship. And the fractures that need to be attended, or the relationship will certainly begin to break. And here's the ugly truth for us today. Marriage is hard. And it's my fault. Amen. The ugly truth is that marriage is hard and it's my fault. So it's not marriage is hard and it's your fault. It's marriage is hard and it's my fault. Relationships are hard and it's our fault. I'm not the easiest person to live with. I mean, I think I am. I think I'm pretty straightforward. But then I start thinking of the things that I've done and the dumb things that I've said. And the time where my wife told me 5 times, reminded me over and over throughout, hey, it's garbage tomorrow. We got to get the garbage cans. Yeah, I'll get it. And garbage tomorrow. I know. I'll get to it. And then I wake up in the morning to that sound, right? The garbage truck's coming. I didn't get the garbage out. And I run downstairs and I grab the garbage cans and I'm running down the road chasing the garbage man. Please take my garbage. My wife is going to kill me. Please take my garbage. And whether I catch him that time or not, I walk back, the walk of shame, realizing I'm still in my shorts, no shoes, nothing else, dragging my garbage can back, hoping my neighbors aren't looking out their windows judging me. And I walk into the house and my wife doesn't say a word. She just looks at me and, And I know I'm an idiot. I'm so sorry. All right, husbands, we're part of the conflict in our marriage. Wives, you're part of the conflict in your marriage. And this is how I know it, because conflict takes 2 people. And so you take 2 people with their differences and with their selfish perspectives, but we're in love. And so we get married and we start to live together, and what do we expect to happen? We expect that my spouse is going to meet all my needs, and we're going to live happily ever after, because after all, we're in love. I mean, we even did the whole candle thing at our wedding. And the two became one, and we're in love. But the reality is, the ugly truth is the only possible outcome is conflict and fractured relationship. Because marriage is hard, and I make it that way. I bring my expectations into the relationship. I try to make it something that it was never meant to be. It's like trying to use a hammer to make dinner. It doesn't work because it wasn't meant for that. And so often we tend to fail at healing the fractures in our relationships. When the fractures form in our relationships, we don't tend to bind them together, to heal them, to take the steps necessary. And if we don't take those steps, and this is what we're looking at today because marriage is hard and it's my fault, if we don't take the steps and if we don't understand how I contribute to the dysfunction, then we're going to repeat the same thoughts and behaviors and patterns that have created some of the stress in our relationships to begin with. See, God gave us this book, the Bible, it's His Word. And it's to help us do just that, help us to navigate the hard relationships in our lives. But it's not just a map to navigate life's challenges. It's meant to lead us and guide us to who God is, to understand who He is and who He created me to be, and the purpose He intended for my life and for my marriage. And so today we're going to look at God's design for marriage, and we're going to look at 3 keys to navigating what makes it so hard. So take a look at one of the very first books of the first book of the Bible, and one of the very first verses that we see as it relates to our marriage and the unity that God has designed marriage to be. God's plan, His design for marriage between a husband and a wife, Genesis 2:24. If you've been to a wedding recently or at any time, this is maybe a passage you have seen or heard. It says, "Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." And as I continue to study this passage, as I continue to look at this passage, year after year, wedding after wedding, God continues to open my eyes to the depth of what this passage has for us. That it's not just the blueprint or the plan of how to get married, but there's so much more to it. This is God's design for marriage between a man and a woman. And what we see throughout the whole Bible is this principle, but it starts right here, that God's design for marriage is unity. That God's design for marriage is unity. That God gave Adam a wife. He created a covenant that says, for all of time, I'm committed to you. Out of all the options in all of the world and all of the people, I choose to spend the rest of my life fighting with you. That's right, baby. I want to share the highest level of dysfunction with you. Right? In Genesis here, God begins to give us 3 steps to take to form this kind of unity that He designed for marriage. And if you're newly married, or you've been married for a long time, or you hope to someday be married, then make sure you're doing these things. He starts off by saying, leave your father and mother. This is a loosening to parental authority. It's a picture of full commitment to another person, that there's no other influence or allegiance, but that I'm leaving something to go to something else. And what we begin to see is unity through sacrifice. All that I've ever known and all my comfort, my mom now someone else is going to make food for me. My dad taking care of the home, and now I'm going to trust someone else to take care. There is a sacrifice, unity that comes through sacrifice of leaving. And then he says to hold fast. Some translations say to cleave. It is this picture of being glued together in permanency. Not like our kids' glue stick that they use at school, and they put the project in their backpack and it all gets torn up, or at best we get it to the refrigerator and then over time the glue stick just peels and it all falls apart. No, like the super glue. Like the strongest glue known to man that can never be separated or dissolved. Like this is the picture to hold fast, to be inseparable, submitting ourselves to one another. That life is no longer about me. It's no longer about getting my way. I'm being joined physically, emotionally, spiritually to another person, a picture of permanent commitment that demands humility, of surrendering myself, when we begin to see unity through humility. Unity through sacrifice, unity through humility, and then the two become one flesh. It's the physical expression of two people being joined together as one. Men, that was your spot for an amen. And what we begin to see is unity through attentive love, engagement and intentionality. But what often happens if we're not careful, when we're not intentional, the pressures of life cause strain and stress to grow complacent, and we begin to dig in. We begin being more selfish and not sacrificial. We become unwilling to grow, and our hearts begin to harden, and unity fades, and the fire of our relationship grows dim. And we end up saying things like, we used to be so close. I remember our wedding day. It was beautiful. What happened? And this slow erosion in our relationships and in our marriages and with our kids, even within the church, it's becoming more and more common. This erosion and breakdown. And if we jump forward to the Apostle Paul's letters to the early church, we see some of this same information, some of these same principles unpacked and unfolded for the relationships we have. See, people later on in the early church, they dealt with some of the same things we deal with. Struggling with the same things in their relationships that we struggle with today. That relationships are hard and it's our fault. And so Paul reminds the early church of Christ's design for relationship. Spoiler alert, it's going to be really similar to what we already saw in Genesis 2. Philippians 2, verse 2 through 4. It says, complete my joy by being of the same mind. And this is what brings God joy in our relationships. Unity. Being of the same mind, of one accord. If you want God to look with favor and joy on your relationship, then it requires unity. How do we express that unity? Because it's not just unity for unity's sake. It's not we brush everything under the rug so that we can be all good. No. It's verse 3. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourself. Let each of you look not to his own interest, but also to the interests of others. Paul points out the same 3 steps towards unity, but it also begins to reveal to us the true enemies of unity. He says, do nothing from selfish ambition, or in other words, unity comes from sacrifice, not selfishness. Unity comes from sacrifice, not selfishness. Do nothing from selfish ambition. See, Jesus' greatest display of love was the sacrifice of his own life. He gave of himself, his only motivation to unify us back into a relationship with our Heavenly Father. That was his motivation. That's what drew him in. Selfishness in relationships fracture unity by rejecting the sacrifice necessary for love to be displayed. So what have you chosen as a mark in your marriage? What have you chosen as a mark in your relationships? Has it been selfish or has it been sacrificial? Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. Unity comes from sacrifice, not from selfishness. The second one, in humility, he says, count others more significant than yourself. Because unity comes from humility, not pride. Unity comes from humility, not my pride. Pride breaks unity by providing only one solution, mine. It disregards others. It believes it's always right. And Paul tells us that if we want to live in unity in these relationships, in our marriage, even with Jesus, then our relationship has to be marked by humility instead of pride. And when was the last time you embraced humility in your relationships? When was the last time you owned up to your mistakes, where you said sorry because what you did was wrong, versus justifying, no, even though I might have been wrong, they were wrong too, and so I'm not saying sorry. That's pride. I didn't get my way, so I'm going to throw a temper tantrum, even though you're a 50-year-old adult. When was the last time you surrendered yourself for the sake of unity, to not have to get my way? Unity comes from humility, not pride. And then he goes on, he says, look not to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Unity comes from loving attention, not neglect. Unity comes from loving attention, not neglect. It means that I'm aware, I'm engaged with the lives of others instead of ignoring and neglecting them. Confessions from your pastor. This, ask my wife, she'll tell you, this tends to be the most distracting thing in my life when it comes to engaging with my family. And no matter where I am or what I'm doing or who I'm with, this somehow keeps ending up in my hands. And I put it away, and I engage, and then somehow as I'm talking, this comes out, and oh, there it is again. And I fail to give my attention to my family the attention they deserve because of the distractions. What is it for you? What is it that distracts you from engaging, giving loving attention? What is it that causes you to neglect those that you love and the relationships in your life? See, if it's, I'm never home because work has become so much more important, or it's just so much that I've just got to get this one last thing done, or I don't know what's going on in my spouse's life because I've been so consumed with my own, or I'm never attending or around for my kids' activities, or it's awkward talking with my kids because I do it so infrequently. When I'm not leading the way in the priorities of spiritual things for my home, when this kind of neglect happens, we isolate our relationships, drift happens, and fractures begin to form. Think about any fractured relationship that you have. Think about any relationship. It doesn't have to be broken, but just strained, stressed, fractured maybe a little. And you'll find one of these enemies as the culprit. My selfishness, my pride, or my neglect. Relationships are hard, and it's my fault. See, this is what happens when we try to navigate marriage outside of God's design. And if those enemies of unity have been the cause of some relational drift, then let me help point us to some steps that we can take to restore unity. It starts with Jesus' words in John 13. Jesus is in front of a crowd of people, and he says this in verse 34, "A new commandment I give you." And I love it because people in Jesus' day are no different than us today. Everyone's looking for some new and improved way to better their lives. So you can imagine everyone hushing and quieting down, the crowd leaning in, and Jesus has their attention. "A new commandment I give you. Love one another." And I'm sure the people sat back kind of disappointed. That's it? Jesus, that's all you got? Love. I mean, I thought this was going to be earth-shattering, window-rattling, transformational, but Jesus was going to change their view of relationships. He was saying, you think love is something that you can fall into and fall out of. I'm going to change all that. And throughout the gospel, you begin to see this amazing transformation as Jesus takes this commonplace word and transforms it and turns it, love, from a noun to a verb. It's no longer just a word that I say, but it becomes something that I do. And for the people in Jesus' day who, oh God, I love you. Jesus' challenge here, prove it. Show it. Live it. It's more than a word, and it's an expression of my life and my actions. Because the sacrificial, intentional, you before me kind of love that God is modeling and talking about here, that Jesus is referring to, is the same kind of love that he's called us to extend to others. You know what makes what Jesus says here such a powerful statement and shift for that culture and for us today? Is that love is what replaces the enemies of unity in my heart. When selfishness comes in, when neglect takes over, when pride seeps through, love becomes like a key that unlocks unity for marriage. Another one of the Apostle Paul's letters to the early church addressing relational conflict, Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5, we see love is the emphasis of the passage, but the purpose of that love is unity for relationship. So check it out. We see the word love 6 times in 8 verses. It says this, it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. It's love through sacrifice. Man, this sounds familiar. Kip, don't you have any new material for us? No, I'm going to keep hitting the same things over and over and over because here's the deal. I've been married 17 years, right? 17 years. Many of you married much longer, and you know sacrifice isn't easy. You know I lean more towards selfish than sacrifice. I lean way more towards neglect than engagement. I'm more prone to pride than humility. So we get the instruction, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up. This is love through sacrifice, unity through sacrifice. He goes on, verse 26, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. How did he love her? He gave his whole self. He sacrificed it all. He gave everything he had, everything he could to bring her back, to bring the church, to bring us into relationship with the Father. Spotless, without blemish, so that when God looks at us, he doesn't see filth and dirt and scum and evil and sin. He sees the righteousness of Christ. In the same way, verse 28, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes, cherishes, gives attention to it, just as Christ does the church. Love through attention. Love through giving of myself and looking at my spouse is more important than me, and I've got to invest, and I've got to sacrifice, and I've got to give the attention here to nourish and build up this relationship. Verse 30, because we are all members of this body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold. Wait a minute. We already read this one. Yeah, he's repeating Genesis 2:24. He's connecting the dots for us. It's sacrifice. It's attention. Therefore, a man leaves his father and mother, holds fast to his wife. The two become one flesh. I'm telling you, this mystery is profound. And it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Love through humility. It's not new. It's the same thing we struggle with over and over. It's what God called us to at the very beginning when he created man and woman in marriage. And it's what we continue to see laid out over and over throughout Scripture, all the way into the early church. Love through sacrifice. Love through attention. Love through humility. This letter tells us God's plan was that our earthly marriage becomes a picture of God's forgiveness and love towards us. That our marriage becomes an example of what God has done for me. That he sacrificed, that he gave attention, that he humbled himself for the unity. That God's love and forgiveness is what unifies us in a relationship with him. Just like the expression of love in action unifies us with our spouse. This was how Jesus showed love. And this is what unites us in a transforming relationship with him. And before we close, I want to just give us 3 practical ways to begin moving towards unity and intimacy in our marriage. 3 ways to stop neglecting our spouse and invest in stronger relationships. That's the way. This is the first way we can begin to strengthen the bond of unity in marriage. It starts with day-to-day. It starts day-to-day. It takes regular day-to-day doing life together to grow. For intimacy, for unity to grow and develop, it takes day-to-day interactions, simple things every day. Things like talking through the details of the day, sharing my calendar with you and talking about the conversations of what's going on and debriefing about what took place today, sharing my ups and my downs. Every night before dinner or at dinner, we're sitting around the table, and my 5-year-old, he goes, highs and lows. Okay, buddy, highs and lows. We're going this way. We're going that. Dad, you're first. Okay, buddy, and best part of the day and worst part of the day. We had a great couple over from the church yesterday. We're sitting around the table. We've prayed. We're all in the middle of eating. Highs and lows. And they jumped right in. Here's our high. Here's our low. Here's the best part of the day. Here's the worst. Just day to day, what's going on in your life? When we give our attention, when we ask questions to show engagement, how was that? How did that go? Do you think it went well? This kind of day-to-day engagement can often draw couples closer together rather than neglecting one another. We engage and connect, even in the most simple of ways. Look at the couples that you know that are doing well, and you'll discover they make a priority of connecting with each other every day. They don't just coexist. They don't just inhabit the same building and navigate around it. No, they steal moments, continually investing in their friendship. And it unites them closer every day. So begin to invest day to day. Another level of intimacy and unity that we can practice these things is heart to heart. Heart to heart. Genesis 2:24. A man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, to become one flesh. There is a vulnerability. I told you this passage, every time I read it, every time I look at it, a new piece comes out that God just opens my eyes and helps me just understand the depths of this passage more and more. There is a vulnerability described in the unity of marriage. A giving of one's whole self to another person. It's heart to heart. This is emotional intimacy that allows my communication to move from surface level logistics of my calendar and management for the day to become honest with my answers to deeper questions like my fears, my worries, my dreams and my hopes, my ambitions. So many couples think that marriage is the final destination or expression of love. I love you, you love me, let's get married. And then they get married and they think, I've arrived at the full expression of love. Now on to move to the next achievement. On to my career. On to building a family. And this may just be the one reason for the lack of intimacy and unity within your marriage. Because maybe you're thinking, well, they know I love them. I mean, I said it on our wedding day, right? That's not, that heart stuff, that's not really for us. That's not really our thing. But just because that you think they may know doesn't mean it's being put into practice. Using your words to connect the dots from expressing love, it can change the game. It can change your marriage. See, it's really hard to restore the fractures and stresses in marriage without the humility of heart to heart. Building vulnerability and intimacy. Building, healing, protecting, nourishing romantic relationships. It takes intentionality because you'll never drift into healthy, fulfilling relationships or marriage. But you'll surely drift out of them. Which is why we have to be intentional to healing and building intimacy day to day, heart to heart. And here's the last one we're going to take a look at and talk about. See, if you want to repair some of the stressed out marriages, if you've lost some hope or purpose, if you're wanting to protect what matters most in your family, then realign your vision with Jesus. This is soul to soul. Day to day, heart to heart, soul to soul, opportunities to practice and replace the enemies of unity and begin practicing sacrifice. Begin practicing humility. Begin practicing attention and love and engagement. Soul to soul. God's design for intimacy in the context of relationship begins with committing to keeping God at the center of that relationship. And part of the reason we fight with our spouse is because we've drifted from soul-to-soul intimacy. In other words, our focus has stopped being on kingdom things. We're not viewing our finances, our resources, our home, our hospitality. We're not viewing our time or our skills with the question of, what does God want me to do with these things to help others find and follow Jesus? Instead, we're focused on, when are we going to get the new kitchen? We're so focused on, what's her love language? I just got to figure that out, and then it'll all be better. Or we get so focused on signing up our kids for the next sports activity and season because they have to have a greater experience than maybe we did as a kid. Let me tell you, that's not a vision for your life. The reason you're fighting is because that's the only vision you've got. And when we connect on a soul level, we realign priorities and grab hold of a bigger vision, a kingdom vision for our marriage and for our family and for our own life. A vision committed to keeping God at the center of my life and my relationships. See, so often the reason relationships drift or our marriages drift is because the details of life, the pressure, the pulling away of our attention squeezes out what matters most. We spend so much time trying to get things done, taking the next hill, living for the vision of the future, that we overlook our relationships and the things that are most important, especially in our relationship with Jesus. And God becomes the afterthought in our family. We put activities and schedule, sports, our own relaxation first, and we give God the crumbs, the leftovers. We attend church whenever we have a free weekend. We come up with reasons why we can't serve and help those experience what we've been able to experience. We create life according to us, and we try to fit God on the edges. And then life hits hard again. And we wake up and we say, God, what happened? We used to be so close. The ugly truth is if you don't feel close to God, it's not God who moved. If you don't feel close to God, if you feel like there's a fracture in your relationship between you and God, that's on you. It's me who's walked away. It's me who's put other priorities in. It's me who's begun shifted from soul to soul engagement. And if this is a familiar pattern in the relationship you have with the creator of your life, it'll be a familiar pattern that you have in the relationship with others, especially your spouse. The ugly truth is life is hard. It's unpredictable. It's beautiful and messy. It's unfair. And there are many times that we want to do what is best for us and forget what matters most. But the relationship, any relationship of value, is built on something bigger than my personal satisfaction and happiness. See, when two servants of God, when two people align under God first, and when a man and a woman fall in love, then life-giving relationships form. When we love one another, when we serve one another, when we forgive one another, the gap between fractures and unity begins to close. See, I can't do this on my own. I don't know about you, but I'm not very good at being humble. I'm not very good at sacrificing. I can neglect pretty easily and just be all consumed with myself. And this is where the work of God transforms me. When I see in His Word, and I see that He's working in my life and in my heart to do things that I could never do on my own. To stop me in the moment of pulling out my phone in front of my family and, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give the attention where it needs to be. I'm going to sacrifice. I'm going to be attentive. See, Jesus gave this new commandment But look how he helps us remember which candle needs to be burning the brightest. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, just as I loved you. So you also love one another. And Jesus was telling us, love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. Every day I'm choosing to let God, not a person, not a spouse, not an earthly relationship, but God fulfill the needs and be the source of my life. Every day I'm choosing to serve others, to put their needs above my own. Every day I'm choosing to invest in my relationships, in my marriage, to be devoted to them, to honor them, to sacrifice for them, to be intentional about healing and building and protecting the intimacy in my marriage. But check this out. Verse 35, Jesus goes on and he says this, by this all people will know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another. Love others just as I have loved you, so you also love one another, because it is by your love. The world is watching. They're looking. They will see how you treat people. They will see how you treat your kids. They will see how you treat your friends. They will see how you treat your coworkers and your spouse. And how you love will be a reflection of Jesus in your life. By this, all people will know that you're my disciple, if you love. It all starts by getting the most important relationship right, my relationship with Jesus Christ. And maybe you've allowed the candle to grow dim in that relationship, and it's time to reignite it. It's time to lean back in. It's time to reprioritize. It's time to surrender and sacrifice myself. It's time to re-engage with my faith. You need some relational healing, and invite God back into the center of your life. Intentionally make plans to build and grow that intimacy. Sacrifice. Be humble. Engage with your spouse through day-to-day connection, heart-to-heart moments, and soul-to-soul priorities. Here's a really cool thing. If you feel like you're distant, or there's a fracture in not just the relationship with your spouse, but in your relationship with God, that begin to lean in with day-to-day connection with Him, with heart-to-heart moments with Him, with soul-to-soul priorities of who He is and what matters most. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you for your word. I thank you for the truth that we get to see interwoven throughout Scripture of unity. Your heart for our relationships, your heart for our marriage, your heart for this church. To recognize that we're not the only church, we're not the best church, we're your church, broken, a mess. And there are other churches. And what would it look like if we are united by Christ and not divided by our pride or our arrogance or our selfishness? And for the marriages in this room that have fractures, for the relationships represented in this room that are strained, oh God, what would it look like to begin to embrace humility, to give attention where it's needed, to begin to replace my selfishness with sacrifice, that you would be best and most in my marriage and in my life. In Jesus' name, amen.